The 911 call that came after the funeral. They folded the flag for him at the little brick church on Ellsworth Avenue, and the wind tried to take it twice before the honor guard's hands persuaded it to behave. It was a raw Thursday in late January in a river town in southeastern Ohio, the kind of cold that makes sound travel farther than sense. The man in the casket was Eamon Ridge, a volunteer firefighter and the sort of neighbor who shoveled 2 extra porches without mentioning it later. The service ended at 4, the last handshake landed at 4:20, and by nightfall, the street had gone back to being only a street. At 9:13, Leora Penn took her seat at the county dispatch console, slid on her headset, and watched the board come alive. At 9:31, the line marked 911 flashed with a familiar number. His number, the man everyone had just buried. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Leora had fielded storms and barn fires and wrong turns called in as kidnappings. She had coaxed calm from people whose words came like hail on a tin roof. She had heard the first breath of a baby through a phone held in shaky hands and the last breath of a stranger who needed someone to hear it. She was 34, kept her hair short to keep the headset from snagging, and wore a gray cardigan because the room ran cold to keep the computers honest. Her desk held 2 photographs wedged into the bezel of the monitor. One showed a river in summer, green as a promise. The other showed Eamon and his daughter Cass standing in front of the station engine with that look people get when duty gives them a reason to grin. The year was 2022. The county had upgraded the system, and the board pulsed with the soft light of new money that still felt like a borrowed suit. Lines identified towers and cross streets. Repeat callers had little tags. When Eamon's number flashed, it wore the tag she had put on it a year ago, Station 4. Her stomach made a small, foolish turn. Her hand did not. She tapped the line open. 911. What is your emergency? Static, not empty. The kind of static that carries weather in its mouth. A faint hiss like tires on wet asphalt far away, then a click as if someone had covered the microphone with a thumb and lifted it again. Leora glanced at the automatic location box. The system offered a circle that could have been a dozen blocks wide and no more. The tower showed the bluff above the river. The timer on the call rolled past 10 seconds, then 15. The headset warmed in her hand. "Hello," she said, voice even, the way training turns fear into architecture. "If you can speak, I am here." Something moved under the static. A breath, slow, disciplined. The way firefighters learn to breathe through a mask like they are rationing the ocean. She had listened to Eamon for years as he called in traffic stops and barn smokes and mutual aid requests in that unshowy voice he kept, even when the ceiling thought it was tired of being a ceiling. Her throat tightened without permission. The board did not care. It kept time. The night supervisor, Brandt, rolled his chair closer, not touching her cord. He was 50, part-time philosopher, full-time keeper of snack drawers. His eyebrows asked a question he did not give words to. Leora tapped a note onto the incident log with deliberate fingers. Caller number displays as decedent from earlier funeral. Open line. Faint audio. Possible misroute for memorial device. Possible spoof. Monitor. "Eamon," she said quietly, because sometimes names open doors the way keys do. "If you can hear me, give me any sound." The line breathed once more, then found a voice. Not bright, not ghostly, a man speaking like someone who had walked all day and only now remembered he could sit. It said one sentence, 3 words, patient, back door locked. Brandt's hand hovered over the radio mic. Leora nodded once. He paged Station 2 because Station 4 was morning and Station 2 would show up with their coats half buttoned and their hearts arranged like a team. He sent them to the Ridge home on Quint Street, the small white place with a porch swing that had never let a guest feel foolish for needing to sway a minute. Leora kept her voice on the line. "Back door, locked," she repeated, writing it, hearing it, feeling the way the sentence wanted to be a map. "Is someone inside?" Nothing answered at first. Then a second sentence, softer. "Cass asleep. Brant's fingers were already moving the way piano players do when the song makes them want to be faster than they are. Officers on the midnight swing shifted their routes without complaint. The medic crew out of town angled their rig toward Quince in case Grief had found a trick that needed medical names. Leora sent a quick text to the on-call clergy liaison because the county did not believe in letting families be alone with what they could not name. "Amen," she said, "steady. We're sending them. Stay with me if you can." The line hissed like rain on a steel roof, and then went quiet. Not the click of a hang-up, the kind of quiet a room makes when a story finally sits down. The call timer rolled to 1 minute 23 seconds, then stopped. Disconnected, the board told her, cheerful as a toy that believes its work noble. Brant opened his mouth and then closed it. He reached for his coffee and decided it was the wrong kind of night for coffee and reached for water instead. Leora sat very still for a moment and felt the way adrenaline stands up in your body and refuses to sit until you give it a task. She gave it the task of listening. The lines danced with ordinary need. A possum in a kitchen. A husband who had cut his hand on a jar. A neighbor who had heard a window break and then realized it was the television. Her hands did their work. Her ear held a room for the line that had gone quiet. Officer G. Park radioed in first. Voice crisp. Tires crunching on salt in the street. Unit 3-1. Quince Street. Back porch light on. Back door indeed locked. Copy request to knock. "Copy," Leora said, hearing her own voice make simple shapes. "Proceed." There are knocks that sound like questions and knocks that sound like the start of a fight. Officer Park knocked like a person who has played in a string quartet. Firm, meticulous, willing to wait between knocks. Leora heard the long, thin silence on the open radio channel that means everyone has decided to breathe in sync. A porch swing creaked, whether from wind or memory. Then Park again, softer. Visual on subject in living room. Teen. Asleep on couch. Television on mute. No visible distress. We are making entry. Park called the locksmith number taped to his visor, because there is always one, and he also called the small cheat that officers inherit, which is to lift the back door on its tired hinges when you turn the key the wrong way. The door opened, a floorboard confessed itself. Park moved through a small kitchen that smelled like heat and spice and thyme. He said, quiet as a blessing, "Cass, it's G, it's me." The girl woke with that rough sound grief makes when it has only just let go for half an hour at last. "Back door," Park said into his shoulder mic. "Locked, now secured." Subject breathing, oriented, tearful, says she fell asleep and forgot the back after the last aunt left. She says her dad would have said it. She says she heard him say it sometimes, even when he was alive, when she forgot. "I'm locking up, then staying here until her aunt returns." The call had been the little bridge a county makes when one house cannot manage all its doors alone. Leora typed. She logged, she breathed. She answered a call about a siren that would not stop on a fire alarm panel, which is a call that can ruin a night or return it to its usable shape. She told Brant she needed 30 seconds, stood up from her console, walked to the stainless sink by the break room door, and washed her hands as if she had been in a kitchen that required respect. At 10:48, the line lit again. Same number. The board did not know how to feel about that and chose its usual indifference. Leora took it. 911. A voice lives inside a headset after a while. The nerves learn routes, the body decides where to keep the sound. The phrase came through low and clear. Basement. Pilot light. She did not hesitate. She sent the fire crew already on Quince next door. She told Park. She told the aunt, who had come breathless from her own house 3 blocks away, that they were going down the cellar stairs for the little square of flame that keeps a winter from doing more harm than good. She heard Cass in the background say, without fright, he always listened to the furnace like it was trying to tell him a joke. Engine 3 called in. Pilot light out. Gas smell minimal. Windows open. Relit. Carbon monoxide monitor registers safe. A firefighter Rowe, who had once done stand-up for exactly 2 open mic nights, and then decided his comedy belonged in the bay with his coworkers, added gently, Whoever called this in has good ears. The board calmed, the town kept its little noises, the river told the ice what to do, and the ice obeyed or not. Leora's shift slid past midnight. At 1:19, she poured tea she did not want and drank it because warm things are a kind of law. At 1:40, an old man reported a woman knocking on his side door asking for a light, and she sent Park and his partner again, and it turned out to be a neighbor who had locked herself out, and they laughed about solutions and did not mention grief, so it would not be tempted to take that house too. At 2:19, when the dispatch room feels like a lighthouse that forgot whether the bay is wide or just an eager creek, the line lit a third time. Leora did not say amen out loud. She let the humanities teacher voice in her head that once told her names have heft say it for her. 911. This time the sentence was longer. Not elaborate, not difficult. The kind of sentence men say when they've spent their lives making tool lists. Check the pan on the back burner. Leora's fingers moved before she could tell them to, and 10 seconds later, Park said on the radio that a pan of oil sat glowing on the stove, forgotten by a cousin who had come bearing food, and then wept, and then gone to call another cousin and set the phone down on the porch rail. Park killed the burner, slid the pan onto a cold eye, and said, "Tell whoever's on that line thank you again." She said, "I will," and understood how inadequate that was, and also how there is no better sentence at 2:20 in the morning when a house has been held upright by 2 extra words spoken by a man with no air left to push them. By dawn, the calls had slowed to their usual winter trickle. The board made its little satisfied beeps, the shift change crept near. Leora printed the overnight logs for the lieutenant in charge and set them in the bin with the neatness of a person who believes paper is a form of kindness. She took off her headset, set it on the hook, and let her neck decide it had been a stiff night. On her drive home, the river looked like a sheet of hammered tin under a sky that had not yet decided whether to blush. She stopped at the corner store for milk and oranges. The clerk rang her up and asked if she had been at the funeral, because everyone had been at the funeral, even if they had not parked their bodies in a pew. Leora said yes, and the clerk said he had known Eamon since they were boys, back when the river took 2 boys and gave back 1, and how the one who came back had never raised his voice again, unless it was to make a frightened kid laugh in a smoky basement. Leora listened. The clerk put 2 extra oranges in her bag, the way men do when they feel the night reach its hand into the room and cannot keep all the light from leaving. She slept until noon and then sat in her kitchen with the radio low and the blinds open to teach the afternoon how to behave. Her phone chimed with a message. It was Cass. Leora had given her number to the aunt without thinking, and nothing about this felt like a boundary violation now. The message was a picture of a backdoor lock and a caption. "He did it again, thank you." She replied, "You did it." He reminded, "That is a team." Cass sent back a heart in the color teens choose when they mean it and do not want to seem silly. Word traveled without gossip's teeth in it. People told each other the version they could bear. Some said the call after the funeral had been a trick of towers, an echo, a message scheduled by a grieving mind that had set a reminder on a phone. Some said Eamon was still doing his rounds, making sure pilot lights and pans behaved. The chaplain said he did not know the mechanics of it and did not care, that love gets to serve in whatever uniform it likes. The fire chief said quietly to Leora, "If my number ever lights your board and I am not in a position to help myself, send the crew. I will not be offended if you use my name to get them there faster." It is Wannon. The next week brought the kind of snow that erases the edges of things. Leora worked 3 overnights in a row and learned to sleep in squares of 4 hours like a cat. She took a call from a man who had found his wife on the floor and guided him to count and compress, and the medics arrived before the counting rasped the hope out of his voice. She took a call from a woman who had locked herself in a bathroom because her boyfriend had stopped being gentle, and she kept the woman talking about the photograph on the wall while the officers climbed the stairs 2 at a time. She did not think about the line until it lit again 2 Fridays later at 1 in the morning. She kept her voice clean. 911. Eamon's voice came again, thinner, like a person speaking through a scarf. It said, in a tone part instruction and part apology, box of matches in the junk drawer beside the oven. Throw them out. She told Park. Park went. He opened the drawer and found a box that had wicked itself damp and mean. He took it to the back porch and soaked it and binned it and then came inside and wrote a sticky note for Cass that read, "Your dad told on you." She woke to it and laughed in that shocked way laughter has when it has been given back its license to exist. Not every call was that kind. Once, the line connected, and all Leora could hear was faint wind and the hollow tick of a cooling engine, and she understood, without needing the lieutenant's later confirmation, that this had been the night the station bays opened, and Eamon's truck had been driven back from the long, slow procession, and the engine had clicked in that language. Machines use to admit fatigue. Once, the line carried only a sound, like boots on gravel, exactly 3 steps, then the pause of a man looking at a sky he used to know from a ladder truck. Once, nothing came at all. And still, she stayed on the line the way you stay on a porch after a friend has gone inside, just in case one more sentence needs to come out and walk around in the air. Spring loosened the river. April made the churchyard look less stern. Cass finished school with a concentration that made her teachers write small notes on the bottom of her papers. You have turned into a person who trusts herself. Leora saw her at the station on an open house Saturday, and the girl hugged her the way nieces do their aunts without asking for the right to be related. They stood under the engine bay's great door and listened to the way small kids treat sirens like musical instruments when given permission. Cass said she sometimes still heard it, the way a voice comes into a room without needing to open the door. She said the voice had told her to bring in the porch rug before a thunderstorm that would have flung it across the block. She said the voice had told her to drink water before her stomach had the language to beg for it. "What do you think it is?" she asked, not demanding that it be a ghost or an algorithm. "I think you live in a county where people answer one another when called," Leora said. "I think sometimes lines open from one room to another because the rooms were built that way by love. I think if we say it out loud too many times, the day will get shy and pretend it never happened. And I think your dad trained his whole body to go when someone needed a sentence, and I do not know what training looks like later. Thanks for watching Allen's To Help Pray." Cass nodded as if she had been offered advice about lifting with her legs, not her back. She put her hands on the engine's bumper like a kid checking the pulse of a whale and whispered thanks in the dull shine where she thought it might carry. The last call came in July, on a night that smelled like cut grass and the electric promise of storm. The board was quiet. Brant had his feet crossed at the ankle, the way he did only after midnight when the county behaved. The line lit. Leora took it with the care of a person accepting a candle in wind. 911. There was no static, no breath, only a single word, perfectly ordinary, soaked in a patience she would remember until the last hour of her life. Enough. Enough what? She asked, back straight, pencil ready. The word came again, a thought set gently on a table. Enough. Then a long exhale, the temperature of a day in which someone has put down a tool they are proud to have used and is ready to wash their hands. She typed the word. She did not send units. She did not mention it to Brant until the end of the hour, when she said it out loud the way you say a number twice to make sure you got it right. He nodded. He threw a cough drop to her like a baseball, and she caught it and laughed because bodies insist on living. There were no more calls after that. The system reassigned numbers as systems do. The board forgot how to glow with that tag. When Leora sat at her desk and the photographs leaned against the monitor made their steady witness, she still sometimes heard the faint tap of a firefighter's gloved hand on a doorframe, the universal signal for ready. She bought a small, heavy key hook for her own kitchen, put it by the back door, and never forgot again. She found that when she walked past the Ridge place on mornings when she needed to see the river before she could trust the day, she would look at the back door and feel not a haunting, not an ache, but the exact rectangular comfort of a thing that had been understood and done. If this kind of thing ever happens where you live, if a phone rings after a set of shoulders in town have lowered themselves to the work of grief, if a name appears on your console that your heart wants to call impossible, do what Leora did. Answer. Stand in the narrow bridge between rooms, ask short questions with soft edges, send help, write down exact words. The world is made of exact words and the work that follows them. Believe nobody and nothing too hard. Let the river decide what is memory and what is rumor. And when the voice finally says enough, let your hands say thank you by resting them, palm down, on the desk you have kept clean so the night can put its weight there for a minute. And if you are sitting in your kitchen with a back door that gets forgetful, say the date out loud to bring the day to heal. Late January 2022. Early April 2022. The hot night in July when rain forgot its manners. Say the town's name so it will remember it has one. Say Amen. Say Cass. Say Leora. Practice the sentence that saved a pan and a pilot light in a teenager who deserved a house that understood locks. Back door locked. Then lock it, then sleep. The county will keep its watch. The river will balance its own ledger. Somewhere, a dispatcher you will never meet will lay a pencil down on a pad with a line drawn through the last open box, a small, perfect check that means this part of the night is finished and the next part may begin. She bought a storage unit. The tape inside explains. She bought the storage unit on a wind-pushed Saturday in early October, the kind of day when flags along the frontage roads snapped like polite warnings and the auctioneer's voice carried clean across the lot. The place was called Milepost Storage, just outside Tulsa, Oklahoma, a long row of corrugated doors facing a strip of prairie that kept trying to become a parking lot. She was not a flipper by trade. She was a librarian who liked old paper and lost letters. Her name was Leora Penn, and she raised her hand on a hunch when the auctioneer said the original renter had defaulted contents as is, cash only. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? The year was 2020, that long elastic year that stretched and snapped and stretched again. Leora had a quiet car with a trunk that clicked shut like a punctuation mark. She had a brother named Finch who texted her thrift store photos like fortunes. She had a mother in assisted living who remembered questions but not answers. And now, for $430, she also had Unit B, 17, 6x10 dust inscription on the floor like an abandoned sentence. The auction staff cut the lock. The door went up with a skipped beat rattle. A smell slid out that was not quite mildew and not quite time. The light, sweet rot of cardboard and old leather. Inside, 3 banker's boxes labeled with a hand that pressed too hard. 1 wardrobe box crumpled along one spine. A busted desk lamp with a brass gooseneck shaped like a question about to be asked. A milk crate of records with sleeves that had forgotten how to hold themselves. And on top of everything, as if someone had said it last and with a decision, a small gray cassette player with a built-in speaker and a rectangle of yellow tape across its lid. On the tape, block letters in Sharpie, "Play me first." The wind moved in the alley between the units and made the metal doors talk to each other. Leora crouched in the rectangle of shade, thumb hesitating for the length of one breath, then pressed the play button. At first, there was only hiss, then a rustle that could have been a sleeve or a curtain, then a man's voice testing his own name like a microphone check. "This is Calder March," he said. "If you found this, you probably also found the rest. Please listen to the whole thing before you throw anything away. I am not saving myself here. I am trying to return what does not belong to me." The date is June 23rd, 2003. The place is Driftwood Storage on Route 49 outside Amarillo. I am saying that out loud, so when the tape gets copied and mislabeled, I can still put the world back where it goes. The sound of a chair leg grumbled against concrete. Papers shuffled. A small metronome of tapping began and stopped. The man took a breath that had a weight in it. I fixed pianos for 20 years. Churches. Schools. People with money who thought sound was furniture. In '97, I started keeping a log of every instrument that had a story stuck in it. By story, I mean the thing you hear when the room gets quiet and the wood remembers. Don't roll your eyes. If you have never heard cedar explain itself at midnight, that is not my fault. Leora smiled despite herself. She didn't know why she had nearly laughed. Maybe because the voice was so unembarrassed by its own certainty. She adjusted the little volume wheel, the speaker fuzzed, then settled. I am recording this in a storage unit for a reason, Calder said. There is a Baldwin Acrosonic in here with its fallboard down and its keys covered by a towel that used to be jade green. On top of it is a shoebox with the words "Keep for Jaspers" written in pencil. I took that box from a house that was being cleared in a hurry. I told myself I was keeping it safe. I told myself I'd hand it back when the time was better. That was 8 years ago. The time never got better. It got brighter and louder, and then it got mean, and the box stayed under my bed like a small dog that thinks it has permission. Today, I am putting it where it belongs, which is somewhere a person can choose it or not choose it without me choosing for them. The tape clicked. He continued, "If you are Jaspers, or you loved one, or you know one, please keep what matters and toss the rest. Just know this first. The shoebox contains letters between two people who met at night school at Tulsa Community in 1974. Their names were Odell Frost and Evo Jaspers. He was 20 and thought he was already late. She was 24 and tired in a way a person shouldn't be at 24. They wrote like the world was going to let them live wherever they set the words down. The letters stopped just before Christmas, 1976. The reason is not a twist. It is the average tragedy. She got sick and then sicker. He did not know how to write to a sickness that took her mouth away. The last letter is his to her. He mailed it 3 days after the funeral. The envelope came back rubber-stamped, forwarding order expired. It sat in a house for 2 decades until I was tuning the family's Kimball, and they told me to set aside anything sentimental for the dumpster. And you see, I have a dumb belief that paper should be read before it is burned. A gust pushed gravel down the row like a handful of beads. Leora paused the tape and looked into her unit, as if the boxes could confirm this story. She set the player on the wardrobe box and lifted the top of the nearest banker's box. Receipts. Polaroids with the color cooled to a vintage sadness. A folded travel map with lines drawn like veins between Amarillo and Tulsa. The milk crate of records gave up a Carole King sleeve, rumors with a coffee ring, a gospel record from a church in Sepulpa. The cassette player droned a faint motor whine as if it were eager to continue. She pressed play. Ivo, Calder said, shifting into the second person, like someone who has been telling a story too long to keep pretending he isn't inside it. If you're listening, I kept something that was not mine because I thought the world would eat it. I am an idiot in exactly that way. I am also your accomplice now if you want me. In the bottom of the box, you'll find a tape that isn't this one. It is labeled December 27th, and you can guess the year. It is her, Odell. The last night, she felt up to getting her voice into a machine. She didn't tell you because she didn't think the machine could hold the shape she wanted to say to your face. I don't think machines can hold shapes either, but sometimes they keep the outline well enough that a person can fill it in. If you would rather not hear it, don't. Burn it and say a kind word and go make a sandwich. If you would, then sit and be ready to forgive yourself after. Whatever you do, don't listen driving. Ask me how I know. Leora's hands moved before her mind did. She slid the wardrobe box aside and hauled the banker's boxes out into the light. The tape ran. Calder cleared his throat once, then offered one last breadcrumb. I am going to leave this unit with rent paid for 6 months. I'm leaving the desk lamp that looks like it belonged to someone who wanted to read long after the room gave up. I am leaving the Baldwin cupboard, which is disrespectful to instruments and necessary for dust. If you are not Ivo or Kin and you open this and felt a tug, maybe you are the kind of person who opens doors in museums you're not supposed to open. I can't stop you. But if you take the tape, take the box too. Stories get lonely if you split them. All right? That is me done. I'm going to label this Play Me First and lock up. I will drive to a diner where the coffee tastes like someone loved it an hour ago, and I will not look back. Good night. The tape wheezed to a stop and stayed there with its little spools paused, like eyes that had decided to blink and stuck. Leora ejected it. The cassette was the cheap clear kind with gray hubs, a bite taken out of one corner like a mark from a nervous jaw. She set it aside carefully and went to work on the shoebox in the bottom of the second banker's box. There it was, the penciled Keep for Jaspers, in a hand that had tried to write neatly when it wanted to run. The lid resisted at first with that dry hiss cardboard makes when it has sealed to itself. She slid a fingernail under and lifted. On top, letters in a stack, rubber band fossilized to a brittle loop, and then snapped quietly when her thumb found it. Dates in the corners. 1974 in April. 1975 with summer still in the stamp. A ticket stub to a cinema that no longer existed. A brochure for night classes with prices that looked like jokes now. And at the bottom, as promised, a cassette slid against the rough cardboard and knocked once. Leora lifted it out. The label was crooked. December 27th. The year written very small. 1976. Her hands were not shaking, but they were listening. Her car's dash still had a tape deck because she had refused to trade it in for a newer something that didn't have teeth for music. She almost walked to the car. Then she stopped because a voice in her head sounded suspiciously like Calder's caution about driving and hearing a thing that bent your understanding of what sound can hold. She looked around for an outlet. The storage office would have one, but the manager had retreated with his clipboard and his coffee to the room with the little TV. Leora picked up the cassette player. A miracle. It had batteries. She grinned at an object in 2020 that ran on forgiveness and double A's. She set the old player on her trunk, fed the tape in with the care the machine rewarded by accepting it smoothly, and pressed play. Hiss. The slow wind of old magnetism waking. A distant clink like a glass set on tile. Then a woman's voice that arrived the way snowfall sometimes arrives in a drought, soft first, then unapologetic. Evo Jaspers, she said, you told me never to record because I try to edit my life when there is a red light. I am ignoring you because not everything we decide together should stay decided. It is the 27th. Christmas is done with me. I am done with it. I wore the scarf you bought, even though it makes me look like a librarian from a story where the librarian unbuttons her blouse at the end and chooses a wild life. Stupid scarf, perfect scarf. I loved it. I am sitting at the kitchen table, and I can hear the refrigerator think. You always say refrigerators think too much, and look how the milk tastes of thinking. The voice was not shaky. It had the kind of steadiness that is not bravado, but a gift a person gives to the people listening. Odell breathed in as if drawing a line she wished were longer. I am not going to make it to spring, she said in the tone of someone admitting they are not going to make it to a movie on time. Nothing tragic in my voice, love. I am trying to keep the tragedy in my hands on this table. I want to put them down gently so they do not wake anyone. I am not afraid. That is not bravery. The body is tired, like a clock, that has been asked to keep time for a dance that went one song too long. What I am is greedy. I want more of you. I want to watch you learn how you stand when there is a child at your hip and a skillet on the stove and a song in your head. I want to hear your temper forgive your mouth. I want to finish organizing the Broken Spine novels at the bookstore, even though we both know I only work there to borrow sentences and put them back. But a person doesn't get to want and get in the same breath. Leora leaned against the car and closed her eyes for a count that surprised her with its length. The lot around her had its own noise, the rattle of a chain on a flagpole, a truck lugging in second, a crow that had lost its patience with something on the fence, but the voice made those sounds pat themselves on the head and promised to be quiet. You asked me once what I wanted you to do if I left first, Odell went on. I said remarry and be happy, because that is what you are supposed to say if you do not want to be accused of clutching. I have a different answer now, and I am allowed to revise because I am still here with breath in my pocket. I want you to put a box in a place where a stranger could find it, with instructions that say, take what you need. Not because I think romance belongs in thrift shops, but because the world seems to pass its tenderness along that way. We pay attention to what we do not expect to find. We pick up what someone else set down and we think, oh, I get to decide two lives right now, mine and theirs. It makes us more careful with both. She laughed, that short, violent laugh people make when they almost cry and disagree with their face about it. If you find this after I am gone, congratulations on your snooping. You love me enough to live in my kitchen after my kitchen belongs to dust. You love me enough to put your ear to a machine when it would be easier to put your head in a pillow. I will not say do not be sad. Be as sad as you please. Be ridiculous with it for a while. Wear your sadness out like shoes on a long walk and then when they have holes in them, throw them away and go barefoot for a month. But promise me you will buy new shoes when the weather turns. Promise me you will keep a stove fuel canister in your car because someday you will offer it to a stranger at a trailhead, and this will be the way the world returns. Something I am stealing right now by leaving. The tape made a small, warbly sound as the tension shifted, then continued. Listen to me bossing you around, Odell said, fond exasperation in the syllables. I am going to put this tape in a box with letters you never saw. You called me a magpie when we met, and look, all I have collected are words and ticket stubs. The letters are mostly me, because you hated writing on paper that did not have music staves, and you did not think words would stay put if they could not sit on bars. The last letter is yours. You wrote it inside your head, and will write it later with a pen. The pen will do its best, the paper will do its best. Here is the part I cannot make neat. I want you to leave the box somewhere you do not own. A storage unit, a church basement, the free shelf in the back of the bookshop. Somewhere a person has to choose to look twice. She paused, and the tape sighed with her. The thing you always say about pianos is in my head, she murmured. That they carry the memory of every hand that asked them to be more than wood. I don't know what I am asking you to be. More than wood, less than a shrine, something that can be picked up and put down without breaking. You are good at that. Your hands know how to pass a thing. The end of the tape came with a soft click, like a door catching. Silence fell with dignity. Leora stood in the concrete wind, the cassette player ticking to itself, and realized she had been holding her breath in a way that made her chest feel like a drawer that didn't want to open. She exhaled and felt the world get its shape back around her. The storage yard's manager had wandered out to smoke and had stopped in the doorway, watching her kindly from behind his own weather. He raised his chin in that American way that means, do you need another person or should I go pretend not to see you? She shook her head and put her palm on the trunk as if the metal could read it. The letters in the shoebox were not neat. They were fierce. They were church and break room and bus stop and laundromat. They were written on grocery lists and margins of community college handouts and the backs of band flyers. They smelled like every hand that had held them, plus cedar dust and a sweetness that might have been someone's perfume from a life that had learned to be generous with its molecules. Leora read the first one, standing there in the wind, and then had the sense to stop. Some reading needs a table, a glass of water, and a chair that learned patience. She loaded the car with a librarian's Tetris, slid the cassette player into the passenger footwell where others might put a tiny dog, paid the auction manager who counted cash with a resigned gratitude, and drove to the house where nobody waited for her, the kind of vacancy that makes room for new things and also makes the old ones echo. Night arrived in the square way it arrives in October on the plains. Leora made tea and wrapped her mother's Afghan around herself in a way that would have made her mother tut with approval. She set the shoebox on the kitchen table and arranged the tapes and letters like she was about to catalog them and would not be punished if she took her time. She allowed herself 3 letters, then the rest tomorrow. It became 4, then 5, then midnight, then 1 in the morning with the lamp glass warm and the tea cold. Odell wrote like a sparrow sings, plain and suddenly cruel with truth. I have not learned how to trust a day that stays good, she wrote in early summer. And then, in late autumn, I am practicing believing you when you say soup counts as dinner. She wrote about the bookstore where old men argued kindly about baseball and pretended to forget to leave so they could be told to stay. She wrote about the night school classroom that smelled like pencils and tired. She wrote about a piano in a church basement with 2 keys that hung back like shy children, and the way Ivo tuned them like he was begging the room to promise to be itself. Ivo appears in the margins of the letters. The way the person a letter is written to appears without ever entering the room. He is funny the way people are funny when they are not trying. He is a fixer of everything except his own habit of leaving tools where he used them last. He wants a straight answer from the future and refuses to ask the question politely. He plays blues in E and refuses to apologize. He brings home oranges when money says no because the taste of an orange is the opposite of a mistake. The last letter was his, and Leora saved it for the last. Don't make it tidy, she told herself, and read it anyway with a kind of fear that felt like jumping into water she already knew was cold. Odell, he wrote, the loop of his J from her surname cutting clean across the top line. Today, the mailbox understood time better than I did. It gave me back the envelope I had paid to send. I am grateful to a thing that has no mouth. I am writing this in the room where you laughed at me for liking a rug with so many flowers it looked like the rug was trying too hard. The rug is trying less hard without you. Everything is. I put your scarf on the back of the chair you always refused to let the cat sleep on, and the cat sat there for an hour, mad as a relative. I do not know how to be a person. Yesterday I did, and I expected to today. And look, I will try again tomorrow, because you made me promise to be stupid with trying. I am putting a shoebox where the world can trip over it. If a stranger finds it, I hope they are the kind who is brave enough to open things that are not theirs and gentle enough to put them back. I hope they write to tell me so I can stop pretending the box is a secret and call it what it is, a return. He had signed only Ivo and then smaller. Forgive me for not getting there in time for the last joke you told that wasn't funny. I would have laughed if you had asked me to, but I am glad you didn't ask me to. Leora slept in the chair with the Afghan around her shoulders and the tape player on the table like a small guardian that had learned to keep watch without being asked. Morning came with a plainness that felt like a blessing. She woke, poured new tea, and wrote on a note card with firm letters that made the pen behave. To anyone named Jaspers connected to Odell Frost. Please call. Then she paused, took a breath, and replaced the word call with write. She did not know why until later, when the answer came folded in an envelope that smelled like someone's drawer. She found Ivo in the only way some people can be found now, by a trail of mentions that led to an obituary that did not brag. He had died in 2011 in a house where the cat had once slept on a chair. The obituary had the names of a sister and her 2 sons, a line about the instruments he had tuned for churches that might not have known what generosity costs, and a sentence that made Leora grip the paper. Survived also by the music he never got to write and the people who played what he fixed. The sister lived in Ponca City then. A search produced a different address in Bartlesville now. Leora wrote the note card anew and set it under a magnet on her refrigerator to stare back at her while she did dishes and decided if it was her place. 2 days later, she mailed a letter with the caution and audacity of a person who has to cross a room to hand a stranger back their own past. She included a copy of Calder's label in the corner because she wanted to prove that intention can be inherited. She waited. Waiting learned her name and sat down in her kitchen with its patient lamp. In a week and 2 days, an envelope arrived with a stamp that had been placed on at a slight angle, the way a person with a careful hand becomes human at the last second. The return address said Jaspers, and Leora sat down on the rug and read with her back against the pantry door. Dear Miss Penn, it began in a slanted script. My name is Anza Jaspers. I am Ivo's niece. I do not know how you got my address, but if you did it politely, I will thank you instead of yell. My uncle used to say, if you make a thing and put it in the world, you do not get to decide how it travels. I am relieved he is right. I know about Odell because I am named after her. He told my sister and me her story when we turned 12 so we would not confuse romance with rescue, and he told it again when we turned 20 so we would not confuse grief with identity. He had a box. We never saw inside it. He kept it under his bed like a grudging god. When he got sick, he told me there was a man named Calder who once did a kindness and a theft at the same time, and that someday the box might return the slow way. If it came, he wanted me to write back to the person who carried it, so I am writing. Tell me what you have. Tell me what you want me to do. If this is a joke, I will forgive you, because it would not be a funny one. Leora wrote back with copies of the first pages, careful not to let her own hunger make her rude. She offered to drive. Anza wrote back the next day with a time and a pot roast menu, as if there were no other way to do this than to feed someone. The drive to Bartlesville took the length of an album and a half, which is not how a librarian measures time, but this time it was. The clouds lay low and thin like a sheet pulled over a lamp. Leora parked in front of a house with white trim that looked like it had been painted by a person who knows how to steady a brush by leaning against the ladder. The door opened before Leora knocked. A woman in her 40s stood with her hands already out, not for an embrace, but for a receipt that weighed more than the shoebox. Behind her, a man waved from the kitchen. The smell of onions and thyme made everything gentler. Anza was the kind of person whose face tells you 50 stories before her mouth says one. She took the box and set it on the table and did not open it for a full minute. Then she did. Her mouth moved a little, not because she was trying to speak, but because a person's lips sometimes learn to read when their eyes cannot keep up. They listened to the tape at the table with hands flat on the wood, not because anyone asked them to, but because it felt like a way to offer stillness to Odell's voice. When the part came about being ridiculous with sadness and wearing it out like shoes, Anza laughed the small laugh of a person who recognizes the flavor of the advice. He said that, she murmured. He said it like he was inventing the metaphor in front of us, and I have a tape of the original. The room held that sentence like it was catching something fragile. They ate pot roast with pieces of potato that had learned the taste of everything else in the pan. They drank coffee that was new enough to forgive any conversation. They opened the box and took out letters with their hands, like museum workers without gloves. They spoke names like they were calibrating a piano, tuning each syllable until it answered back. That night, Leora drove home under a sky that pretended to be empty and was not. She left the radio off so the car could hear what the night was doing. She slept and dreamed of a storage unit that kept changing its door color, and every door she opened was a different past returning itself. She woke with the taste of dust in her mouth and did not mind. In the weeks that followed, the box lived a second life in a house that understood how to host it. Anza read a letter a day out loud at the table with the window cracked and the dog asleep under her feet. She wrote Leora small updates. Today I learned how Odell laughed at my uncle's fear of oranges. Today I learned that night school used to smell like chalk and resolve. Today I learned that a person can fit a year inside a paragraph and still find room for the weather. Calder's name became a project. They wanted to thank him and did not know how to find his breath in the web. Leora tried phone directories from Amarillo with her librarian stubbornness. She found 3 Calder marches that were not him, and one who had moved 2 years prior with no forwarding address. She found a piano tuner's business listing with a disconnected number. She turned to a stack of clippings and found, in a small column with a blurry photo, a mention of a memorial for a Calder M in a church that had bad lighting and kind carpet. The date was 2007. The photo showed a pair of hands holding a felt strip and a tuning hammer. The caption did not brag. A life, it suggested, that had done work and left the room better. Anza wrote a letter anyway. She wrote it as if it were going to be read out loud to a person who could not afford to be bothered unless the bother was beautiful. She mailed it to the church. She mailed one to the storage facility in Amarillo in case anyone there had inherited the story. She put one in a book at the free library on her block, tucked into a copy of a novel nobody seems to want when they need it and everybody wants when they have room. She addressed one to no one, put no stamp on it, and tucked it in the shoebox under the letters. In December, Snow performed its first attempt, failed, and tried again with a more persuasive voice. Leora went to visit her mother, who held her hand, and asked her what year it was, with a tone that admitted timelines are slippery now. Leora said it aloud, 2020, and then, when her mother smiled at the neatness of the numbers, Leora added, "It is also Tuesday afternoon and you like soup." Her mother nodded, satisfied by specifics. Leora read to her from one of Odell's letters. Her mother, who had always loved women who refused not to be clever, laughed once and said, "Tell her to write more." "I'll tell her," Leora said, and did not correct the tense. On the last day of the year, a small package arrived on Leora's porch in weather that could not decide whether to rain. It was wrapped in brown paper with string, old-fashioned on purpose and not by necessity. The return address was a music shop in Amarillo that smelled when she opened the door of rosin and hope. Inside the box, a cassette labeled in a different hand. It said simply, Driftwood. Then, a date in 2003. A note was tucked in. "You do not know me," it read. I run the counter at the place where Calder used to buy strings cheap and swear under his breath that the new strings had no patience. We found this in a drawer where the receipts go to forget their names. He left it here the week the storage unit auctioned off his things. He told me to hold it for a person who would ask nicely. No one did. Maybe you are that person. She put the tape into the player with a care that made the table hear it. The hiss began like a tide. Calder's voice arrived. Older or tired, she couldn't tell. He spoke as if he had skipped the first parts he usually said because he felt he owed a different kind of sentence. If this is Leora or Anza or someone else kind who made room for a box to travel, listen. I wanted to write a clever instruction for how to put things back. I do not have one. The closest I have is this. When you find a story mid-sentence, do not add your name to the end like a signature. Put your name small in the margin as a witness. Then hand the page to the person whose life it is and let them choose their own pen. He laughed softly, like a man who had decided to stop scolding himself and was enjoying the quiet. The Baldwin in Unit B17 has a hairline crack in the bridge that will not keep it from speaking if someone loves it anyway. Pianos are like that. People are like that. You will think you have to fix the crack to deserve the music. You do not. You will think the crack is the point. It is not. The point is that the thing still says what it came to say. The tape ended without drama. Leora sat in her kitchen with the shoebox open and the lights soft and the winter outside, pretending it would not ask for more heat. She took out Odell's last tape and listened again, not to study, but to keep a promise to let a voice use the room. She held the letters that had traveled across years, and storage fees and dust and a man's guilt. She smiled down a hallway of time toward a piano she would never see. In February, Anza sent a photo. It was the Baldwin, its towel folded and placed properly, its fallboard up, a vase of eucalyptus on the far end because some leaves talk quieter and longer than flowers. The caption said, "It holds tune better than it should." Anto would have called that grace. The next photo was a child's hand, Anza's daughter, pressing middle C like a doorbell. The next, a dog asleep under the bench. Spring learned its way up from the soil. Leora took the empty cardboard from her unit to the paper recycling, and the man there told her his mother had kept a box of napkins with love notes on them that the family found when the house had to forget them. People put thoughts anywhere, he said, and laughed a little as if proud of humanity's mess. She kept the cassette player. She kept the first tape that said, "Play me first," and the second that said December 27th because some objects become addresses. She kept a copy of one letter that had a sentence she recited on days when the library had more books than hands and more requests than hours. The sentence was Odell's, and it said, "I do not write to be wise. I write to leave a door open in case someone needed that exact door today." On a June morning with thunder stacked like books no one had time to read, Leora pulled into milepost storage for the last time. She slid her unit door up, empty, except for the desk lamp that curved its brass neck, and asked if she was sure. She plugged it in and turned it on, and the light made a small pool on the concrete like a confession. She left it on for a minute because objects appreciate ceremony even when they pretend not to. Then she turned it off, marked the unit clean on the clipboard with a pen attached by a chain, and dropped the key into a mouth that had swallowed thousands before. On the drive home, she passed a church sign that had not changed its advice since she was small. Be kind. Everyone is fighting a hard battle. She would have rolled her eyes at 12. She nodded at 40. At a stoplight, a man held a cardboard square with letters that tried to be neat. "Need help," it said, and then smaller. "Not a bad man, just a broke one." She handed him the rest of her change, and a bottle of water she had known would be asked of her eventually. His thank you had the shape of a person accustomed to sudden doors. Years later, when her mother's memory folded itself like a map and slipped into a drawer that did not belong to any room, Leora took the box of letters to the assisted living and read them aloud on Tuesdays. Not all of them. Some are private and stayed private. Enough that a circle of women who had once been harsher with themselves than they deserved sat a little easier in their chairs and made the kinds of noises women make when a sentence lands where the body keeps its truest things. One afternoon, a woman who seldom spoke said softly, Put a box in a place where a stranger could find it, and then laugh like a girl about to run. If you are listening to this story, there is probably a door near you. A cupboard, a glove compartment, a drawer that has learned patience by becoming cluttered. Somewhere in your town, there is a shelf where someone has left what they could not keep, and someone else will take what they did not know they needed. If you have a tape player, wind a tape with your finger and feel the old physics still answer. If you only have your voice, use it in a room at 2 in the morning and see if the wood answers. If you have a box, consider putting it where a stranger could find it. Write on the lid in pencil so the world knows it can edit. There was no twist here. No ghost in the unit except the ordinary one that lives in paper and insists on teaching us how to carry each other a little farther down the hall. The man who took what was not his did not profit. He apologized. The woman who wrote did not survive long enough to call it a memoir. She survived long enough to call it a door. The man who loved her grew old and kept tune. The people who came after learned the shape of falling in love with strangers and the more difficult shape of giving the thing back. And so, if it is late where you are and the house has stopped making its usual noises, pour water into a glass and notice the sound it makes when it hits the bottom, hollow turning to full. Think of a box under a bed. Think of a storage unit with a label you can't resist. Think of a piano with a hairline crack that still sings like itself. Think of a sentence in a letter that arrives in a year you needed it, from a person who never knew your name and said it anyway by accident. Then stand, walk to whatever door you have, and leave it open for one slow, careful minute, just long enough for someone who needs exactly that door today to find their way through. Her phone pinged at a grave with her name. The notification bloomed on her screen the moment her shoes left the gravel and slid onto the soft path between moss-dark stones. A small bell chime, bright as glass. A banner at the top. "You have arrived, Edeni Hale." The words sat there as calmly as a weather app, as if the city had decided to label her the way it labels a bridge or a square. The place was Bonaventure Cemetery in Savannah, Georgia. Spanish moss hung in long, steady sentences from the live oaks. The river kept its secrets behind the bluff and breathed like a sleeping room. It was late afternoon on a Sunday in early November, the air cool enough to make her wish for sleeves and warm enough to forgive her for forgetting them. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Her name was Edeni Hale, 28. She worked in visitor services at a small maritime museum upriver, the kind of job that made her memorize the angles of ships and the dates when storms came ashore. She liked fonts and quiet, and the sound salt makes drying on stone. She was visiting Bonaventure because her friend Anson had flown in from Minneapolis for a long weekend, and the two of them liked places that let you feel your breath in your mouth. The year was 2021. Phones knew where you were within decent intimacy. Some headstones wore small plaques with codes that asked to be scanned and promised a story. They had parked on Bonaventure Road under an oak that had learned to be older than most houses. The sky was simple, a clean coin of light. The volunteer at the office had given them a paper map and a soft-voiced list of locations worth the walk if you wanted your day to hold. Look for the little angels facing east. Find the section where the camellias keep blooming against instruction. There's a family plot that feels like a room you shouldn't step into without knocking. No one mentioned a notification. Edeni stared at her phone. The banner did not give a location like Section F or Plot 31. It was the same tag her calendar used when she arrived at work or home. "You have arrived, Edeni Hale." As if she were a place. As if the grave were her. Anson leaned toward the screen and squinted. He was tall and light-footed, a teacher of high school literature who carried poems in his pockets like receipts. He read the banner and then her face and made a small arranging motion with his hands, the way he does when he wants to place humor where fright is trying to sit. "That's a bug," he said, not unkindly. "Or a geofence you made and forgot. Did you tell your phone to remind you to be yourself today?" She clicked the banner to see where the phone thought she belonged. A map opened, a blue dot pulsed with the steady patience of a small heartbeat. A gray pin sat 100 feet east in a section labeled McAllister. The pop-up bubble above the pin read Idany Hale in the same unsentimental font. She did not have a virtual contact called a cemetery. She had not created a reminder to arrive at her own name. The phone had decided the path curled between stones with dates that made you speak them out loud, because numbers are easier to hold when they come through the mouth. 1873, 1920, 2009. The Oaks leaned as if sold on the idea that the living need rehearsal space. Anson spoke a tour fact about a poet who loved this place and whose plaque visitors touch in a small, quick superstition. Idoni nodded because liking facts is a way of staying steady. Her pocket shook again. Another chime, the same banner. You have arrived. Idany Hale. She breathed the way the yoga teacher on the internet tells you to. In through a count of 4, hold for 4, out for 6. They followed the path east until the bluff opened its shoulder and let the wind test their sleeves. The section ahead was a little higher, a little more sure of itself. A plot enclosed by low stone, dressed in ivy, sat beneath a live oak that looked like a table that had decided to grow legs. In the center stood a headstone gray as rain, taller than Idoni's shoulder. The name at the top held Idany Hale. She stopped. You might have stopped too. Her name was not common. Her mother had found it in a book of Old English names and liked the way it sounded like a promise made under a tree. She had never met another Idany. To see the letters in this order on stone felt like stepping into a movie where you have lines you did not audition for. Anson's hand found her elbow without a show of it. He had the sense not to say, wow, or are you kidding? He stood with her and let the river finish a sentence neither of them had started. The dates carved below the name were the first clean relief, 1974 to 2014, not hers. A woman 2 decades older, gone 7 years now. Under the dates, a line that read as Keeper of the Keys. The stone carried a small oval of glazed photo, a face with hair tucked back, eyes steady, a glint of a key ring at the edge of the frame. The oval was rubbed to a shine from fingers, the way love polishes small things while refusing to say it is love. On the right-hand corner of the stone, someone had bolted one of the new plaques with its little square of patterns. Scan to learn more. People who love story cannot resist a square that holds one. Idany lifted her phone and let the camera see. A link opened without asking for anything. A page built by a memorial service company bloomed. At the top, the name again. Below, a small biography. A life lived with habits, upright and kind. A childhood in Chatham County, a long run as cemetery sexton. The last line read in a voice that felt like a woman sitting on a step with a mug and a warning and a grin. If you need something, tell the ground. It will tell me. While she read, the phone hummed again. Not a banner this time. A little circle pulsing at the top of the screen, the way maps announce a place with enthusiasm. The circle flashed once, then settled. Idany swiped down to see the source, a calendar reminder with no category. White, titled simply, Arrived. Location, here. She had not written that. The phone, perhaps, had decided the day needed a label, or the small plaque had more to it than the page admitted. Anson said the woman in the photo had librarian eyes. He meant that as a compliment. He pointed at the key ring. He said his grandmother had been a keeper of the keys at a church in North Dakota, and those women know where every grief sits at every hour, the way a night janitor knows which chairs spit gum and which ones sigh. They stood a while. People walked past in respectful silence, guided by a docent's voice that held just enough theater to keep 15 people from wandering into their own daydreams. Spanish moss moved like thought repeating itself. A flake of light rose off the river and fell back as if it had changed its mind about being air. It would have been a good story already finding your own name on stone, a phone that had the audacity to tell you you had arrived, but something else decided to be true. A little tone sounded from the phone, the way sounds do when an app you forgot you had decides to help. It was the noise her AirDrop made when someone nearby wanted to share a photo at inopportune moments. The screen shifted to a dialogue. A file offered to send itself to her. The sender name was a string of letters and numbers that meant nothing. The file name read Keys. Anson leaned in and made his face calm. "Decline," he said gently, "because strangers in public places with quick hands make tricks, and both of them work in museums and have seen every version of the human habit of testing boundaries." She hovered. Decline would be wise. Accept would be a dare. She pressed accept because sometimes you let stories finish what they start. The file downloaded. It was not a photo, it was an audio file, a minute 42 in length. The waveform showed it wasn't silence. She tilted the phone toward her own ear instead of speaker because you don't open a voice in a cemetery loud unless the voice has earned the right. Static first, then the sound of wind combing something thin, then a woman's voice, the age of a woman, who tells tools where they belong and expects cooperation. The voice said, "Dry as a towel and warm as a summer kitchen. If you are standing over me, child, and your name is mine, you can help me keep my promises. Put your phone on the stone and leave it be a minute. It will tell you where to stand next." Anson's eyebrows did a small jazz riff and then tried to behave. "Okay," he said softly, a word that meant, "I am here and I am not going to ruin this with cleverness." Idony set the phone on the flat top of the headstone the way the voice had instructed. The screen slid into its lock. Her reflection replaced her. The oval photo looked past her shoulder the way old photos always do. She counted in her head as a way to keep the childish fear of being tricked from standing up and knocking the ritual with its elbow. 50, 60, 78. The phone buzzed once, she lifted it. The map opened of its own accord. The blue dot had moved nothing. The gray pin had changed. It labeled another grave 30 yards north with a name neither of them had seen on the paper map. Rosin Hale. A second name. Another Hale. The first name was Welsh and not common here. They went because the day had asked enough times to be answered polite. The second stone stood lower, more modest. The granite, a color you could never find on purpose if you looked in a catalog. The dates were older, 1931 to 1999. The epitaph read, "She kept the gate lighted," and under that, in smaller letters, so faint you could only see them when the cloud put its hand over the sun, a line, Rosine was born. Rosine Idris. She married into Hale and stayed. Tell my niece if she comes through here that I see her when I count keys. "I am not anybody's niece," Idini said aloud, and then took a breath because she heard the defensiveness squirreled underneath. "I mean, not hers. You might be more people's niece than you know," Anson said gently, a man who had grown up with uncles who weren't uncles and yet were more family than the kind that wears your face. They stood while the wind added a signature to the bottom of the page of the day. The river put its shoulder against the bank and leaned. The phone did not ping again for a while. A cardinal went from one branch to another with the purposeful speed of a person who knows where the parts are stored. A group of teenagers trailed an auntie through the lanes, popping gum in a respectful way, which is a regional miracle. Idony looked up Rosin on the cemetery's database because when your heart gets odd, facts make a braid to hold on to. The database was one of those volunteer-built websites that carry the tone of a potluck where everyone brings a dish so exact it shames you for choosing salad. Rosin's entry was thorough. Born Rhonda Valley, came across with parents as a child, settled in Chatham County, married one Mr. Hale, worked checklist after checklist for the electrical union office, sang alto in church with the patience of an anvil, survived by no children, preceded by older brothers, all gone. Niece mentioned in an obituary in 1999 with no name given. Anson made a sound that meant the story had wiped its hands on his shirt and was ready to cook. The phone chimed once more, now with the tone her museum app uses when a beacon in an exhibit hands you a fact. She had turned beacons off last month because being interrupted by history while in history felt a bit like a stage whisper in a quiet theater. She had not turned beacons back on. The screen read, "A note is waiting." A map pinpointed the little brick building the cemetery uses as a workshop for the grounds crew. A path drew itself in blue between the Hales and the shop, like a string in a child's game. They went because keys that ask to be found deserve not to rust. The door to the shop was propped with a cinder block, the way doors are propped everywhere when the weather learns to be useful. A radio played a station that chose old soul and occasional baseball score updates. No one was at the counter. A bell stood there anyway, the kind that rings a sound like a glass penny. Anson rang it because he likes participating in obvious rituals. A man in his 50s with a badge that read August came in from the back, wiping his hands on a rag that had earned its keep. "You folks need a map?" he asked, then took a longer look at their faces and revised. "Or a minute." "We were by the hailstones," Idony said, and watched the way a man looks when a rhyme finds his ear and tells him it cares. August nodded. "Course you were," he said. "I keep an envelope for that family. Been waiting on who it's waiting on." He reached under the counter, where drawers have learned to hold what should not be lost, and brought up a large yellow envelope with a blue paperclip that had rusted a little by choosing weather. The envelope had 3 words on the front in tidy block letters. For the next Idony, heat went across her face like an honest light. August saw it and stilled. He handed her the envelope the way people hand one another babies, meaning well and moving slow. She opened it with her thumb. Inside, 3 items. A small brass key, old, not ornate, with teeth filed like a decision. A folded sheet torn from a spiral notebook, edges soft with years. And a wallet-sized photo of a woman in a blue work shirt with a name patch and a grin you could feel on your back like afternoon Sunday. The patch read, "Idony." The face belonged to the woman on the first stone. The note was written in blue ballpoint in a hand that pressed harder than paper deserves. It read, simple. "For the next Idony in this county who can hear me the way a key hears a lock, my niece is out there. She won't say yes to the word niece because words are stubborn. She'll need to open the box in the old mausoleum we keep for tools and favors. The key is for the small door on the left. Lift on the latch while you turn. The box has what belongs to her and me and her grandmother. If she is standing at my stone with a phone, she will know that I know. Don't bring a crowd. Bring one friend who reads instructions with his eyes. Leave the key when you are done. We can count without hands here. I'm not someone's niece," she said again, and heard how the sentence grew less certain with practice. Her mother's family tree began and ended in a different state. A line of women who told polite lies to spare one another the sharp edges and did their grief in broom closets. Her father had not survived long enough to name distant relations. He had left behind a bent screwdriver and a smell that her body still could find when a day asked. Anson's hand found the counter in a quick pat, like checking for keys as you leave the house. "You don't have to be a niece to be the person meant to do a thing," he said. "But also you might, and it might not matter how that happened." August tapped the counter twice, a habit that sounded like a yes. "The small left door," he said. "People never see it. Take the path behind the office and go right at the angel with the missing hand. The mausoleum is the little brick one that looks polite. The left door sticks the way a lie sticks to a room. Do what the note said, lift and turn." They went back into the light. The blue string on the map did not bother now to draw. The path knew their feet. The angel with the missing hand stood where the volunteer had said, "Angels stand, face east," blank expression that suggested she had witnessed every century and found nothing quite bad enough to frown at yet. The brick mausoleum waited with that small pride buildings have when they know they are not the grandest on the block, but are the one that does the job without complaint. The left door looked like a panel added later. The brass latch had the smoothness that comes of being touched by people who mean to get work done. Idony slid the key in, the teeth caught, and then thought better of it. She lifted the latch with her other hand and turned. The lock gave. The door opened 6 inches and stopped, ticked by a wooden wedge that had been insinuated at the bottom by someone who had not wanted the door opened by accident or habit. Anson reached down and pulled the wedge free. It had a date burned into it with a soldering iron. 2014. The year on the first stone. Inside was a closet of sorts, pegboards and hooks, a rake missing its second tooth, a coil of twine that had memorized its circle and would not learn a new trick, and on a shelf at eye level, A tin bread box with a domed lid, painted a green, faded to the color of river glass. No lock. Written in the same blue hand on a piece of tape was a word: hail. She lifted the lid like a person lifts lids on boxes that might contain bees or inheritance. Inside, arranged with the blunt care of someone who never made a mess unless a branch fell where it shouldn't, sat 3 items: a narrow ledger with a black cloth spine, a key fob with 3 small brass tags stamped with numbers, and a folded paper bag, the kind grocery stores use for baking flour, rolled tight and rubber banded with an elasticity that made its own sound. She opened the ledger first because pages are her map. Names, rows of them, dates, locations in the cemetery with check marks where gates had failed and been repaired. Next to some entries, a small star. Those starred names also appeared on the little brass tags. Numbers, not random, not plot numbers, locker numbers. The cemetery kept a bank of lockers for the grounds crew in a shed she had not thought needed one. Her phone chimed in her pocket, a small suggestion from the maps. Direction nudged, left, then right. Then, would you like to add this location to favorites? She ignored the phone. The ledger asked for attention. On the inside back cover of the ledger, a note in different handwriting. Spare for Rosen's niece if she finds it. Locker 12 holds what isn't in the ground. If days are bad, tell the river. The river tells me. The tags on the key fob read 10, 12, 14. She ran her finger over 12 the way a person does over a scar. She felt nothing supernatural. She felt focus. Anson took the bag at her nod and unwound the rubber band. Inside lay 2 objects wrapped in butcher paper. He unrolled the first. A locket. Gold. Thin as luck. With a hairline crack. Shaped like lightning. If lightning were careful. Inside, a photograph so tiny it could be breathed away if you weren't paying mind. A baby in a christening gown that had borrowed lace from a curtain. The face pinched in the way newborn faces pinch. On the back, in pencil that had migrated into the paper like a crop planting itself, a name. Rosen Idris Hale. A line below it, for my niece to hold if she comes to hear me. He unrolled the second. A county map from 1968, creased, the paper's fiber gone feathery at the folds. A road circled in blue pencil. A margin note. That old step bridge out by the waterworks. We left something in the middle beam in 74. If you can't find it, it means we didn't need it. If you can, well, you'll know. We are not going to a step bridge at dusk, Anson said. A man who loved old maps and also loved not getting in the paper under the wrong kind of headline. We are going to find Locker 12 while the Museum of the Dead is still on our side. They found the shed. August had seen their faces through the glass and met them halfway with the keys because some stories ask for a witness who knows better than to narrate. He led them to a wall of small metal lockers, each door painted the dull red of a barn that had not given up but had learned to pace itself. He unlocked 12 and stepped back. Inside lay a small stack of shallow boxes, each labeled with a date. The top was the 1, 2014. Under that, 2008. Under that, 1999. Anson lifted the top box and set it on a workbench. He opened it with care. Inside, wrapped in tissue that had become more suggestion than paper, sat a handful of objects that people keep for reasons the living should not pretend to understand quickly. A church key. A photo of 3 women, arms crossed, outside a union hall, one of them with a name patch that read R. Hale, a Polaroid of a red step bridge with water under it purling toward a bend. A handwritten note folded small. The note read, "For the niece who knows the word niece because keys hum when they find their door. You were not an accident. We kept count. We named you all the ways we could. Our names were soft and stubborn. Take what you want, leave the ledger so the ground does not have to work alone." She sat because standing felt rude. She is a woman whose mother did not tell stories with this kind of curve. She gathered the truth like thread. Her mother had been born in this county and left when she was 19, a bus to another state, a man met in a grocery line, a child years later when the idea of staying had become heavy. She did not talk about siblings, claimed not to remember cousins, flinched when the phrase back home came up. The name Hale had come not from romance, but from accident or choice, a name taken because other names insisted on being something else. Rosen Idris had married into Hale, but the family had been built long before that. Keys had been passed with and without rings. August stood with a posture that says, I will not take your moment away from you. When the radio in the shed shifted to a weather update, he reached and turned it down so the forecast would not interrupt a storm already occurring. Anson put his hand flat on the bench and counted to 8 for no reason his body would confess. Tell me if you want me not to read the other notes, he said. The kind of friend a person needs in rooms where both mystery and bureaucracy show up at the same table. Read, she said. We're already here. The note in the 1999 box was from Rosen and felt like laughter on a porch when the pots are already washed. The house we put ourselves in is not one the county believes holds blood, she wrote. But it holds me. And it holds the keys. If you need a name, the river has one. If you need a door, the shed does. In the box from 2008, a different hand, shakier, it read, I kept the lights in the gate, all through the storms. I think sometimes we are simply the people who keep lights. If you are mine, you will know when to turn one on. In the box from 2014 was a letter from the sexton whose face smiled off the oval on the stone. She wrote like a woman who had lived by the kind of lists that get family through winter. I have no children of my own except the Gates, she wrote, but I have a niece whether the paper says it or not. I kept her not by being in the room, but by owning my stubbornness. If she stands over me with a phone and hears me, she will take what she needs and leave what she should, and I will go on counting with my hands in dirt like I like to do. They left the boxes as they'd found them, shifted nothing but air. August closed the locker with a satisfaction that felt like lining up the edges on a stack of bills and smoothing them down. He did not ask for anyone's story. He had one of his own, built of this place, and the line of names he keeps with the quiet grace of a man who waters plants. By the time they stepped back into the paths, the light had hunched into evening. The river sounded less like sheet music and more like a phrase repeating. The map on her phone had stopped suggesting anything and gone back to pretending it was an obedient device. The air smelled like river, camellia, and a penny someone had worried in a good pocket for a decade. Anson asked if she wanted to go to the step bridge. She said no, in a voice that held both sorrow and a plan. Tomorrow, in daylight. When names sit on surfaces more politely. He agreed because this is what friendship is, a committee about timing. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with the ledger borrowed under August's nod and the locket under her thumb. She called her mother. The call rolled twice, and then the voice she knew and loved and sometimes resented filled the line with wind and caution. They made small talk for 30 seconds, and then they moved somewhere they had not walked together. Ma, she said, who was Rosen? Who was Idony before me? Silence, sincere. A kettle, somewhere in the house. The refrigerator willing itself to be steady. Finally, her mother sighed, and the sigh sounded like a drawer allowed to close after being held open too many years. My aunt, she said, not by blood, by the kind of line people draw when the law does not help. She and the other one, the sexton, kept me safe when I was little and didn't know that my father wasn't safe to be around. They ran the lights in the cemetery and in the loose latch doors and told me when to lock things and when to open them. They were more my aunts than any of the few relatives that share me. When I left everything. I thought that was how you survive. I have not told you the parts you asked me about because I thought you'd want something tidier than I had, and because I am silly enough to think if I did not say the names, the ache would go to sleep. She told a story of a girl who sat on a stoop counting keys while two women kept a town's small doors in working order, literal and figurative. She told how those women had taught her to move through rooms with respect and to leave envelopes where they'd be needed. She did not speak tenderly about the man who invented the silence she had carried. She spoke tenderly about the other men, the ones who changed locks without asking why, and taught a child where the ladders were kept for days when rain insisted. I should have told you, her mother said finally, soft with the fatigue of a woman who has not confessed a simple truth for a long time. You have two names. The the one I gave you, and the one the other women left for you to find when you were ready. You belong to both. You belong to yourself most. They went to the step bridge the next day. It was out by the old waterworks, just as the margin note had said. The county had let Weeds try to become the principal of the place, and the Weeds had accepted the assignment with poor posture and pride. The bridge stood, red paint scabbed into beauty, water under it moving with the impatient streams have when the river bullies them with schedule. In the middle beam, behind a square of metal the size of a book, a hollowed space. Inside, wrapped in waxed paper, a ring of keys on a chain that had learned 3 hands. Each key had a number: 10, 12, 14. The fob matched the tags in the box. Beside the keys lay a square of paper with a tiny handprint in paint the color of that old camellia behind the office. A child had been here once. She had pressed her hand down. Someone had saved it for a woman who would put her hand down later and understand they did not take the keys. She set her palm over the handprint. The sizes did not match. The feeling did. She closed the plate. She and Anson walked back to the car with the sun finding their shoulders and the hum of insects writing their own accurate dissertations on persistence. Back at the cemetery, she returned the ledger. August nodded like a man at the end of a good piece of work. She walked to the first stone and put 2 fingers on the glazed oval where the sexton's face had learned to look past tourists to the river. She did not speak. She let the ground and the river carry whatever needed moving. Her phone did not ping again there. It would ping months later, once in a grocery store aisle in a different city, when an older woman in a union jacket looked at her and tilted her head in a way that meant keys are a language. It would ping once again when she held the hand of a friend through a night much too long and heard as clearly as weather a voice say, "Lift and turn." It would ping at odd hours for the next several years when doors asked to be locked or opened with care. Sometimes it would be an app acting like a person. Sometimes it would be a person acting like a map. Sometimes it would be a name arriving in a room with good manners and old roots. If you want the tidy ending, it is this. She wrote to the memorial company to ask who had access to the airdrop at the stone. No one answered in a way that satisfied anyone who cares about permissions. She kept the photo of the sexton in her wallet behind the museum badge and found that having a face like that near your ID keeps you from forgetting where the door to the stairwell is in a fire. She learned to count gates with her hands, the way women in that county had since the first lock learned the first habit. She took pies to August's workbench and listened to his stories. She phoned her mother on Sundays and let the conversation go long enough to find the sentence that mattered each week. She carried with her the sentence from the oval's page. If you need something, tell the ground. It will tell me. If you want the less tidy truth, it is this. Sometimes your life is a geofence you didn't set. Sometimes you arrive at your own name carved in stone, and the stone says, "Welcome." Sometimes you are the niece of women who bent keys into new jobs and called that bending prayer. Sometimes your phone pings at a grave, and the ping is only a device doing what it was taught, and sometimes it is a noise a river makes when it is trying to talk through everyone's machines at once. If this happens to you, if you walk under trees that have learned the art of holding up clouds, and a little bell sounds in your pocket, and your name appears as a place, don't panic. Stand where you are. Read the dates out loud so the year will stop pretending it is only a number. Touch the stone with 2 fingers, not more. Listen for the voice that sounds like someone who knows where the ladders are kept. If a key is offered, lift and turn. If a door sticks, lift and turn. If a person asks for a niece, say the word niece like a new tool you know how to use. And when you leave, take the long path that wanders near the bluff. The river will be there keeping count. The oaks will be there practicing their patient grammar. Your phone will settle back into behaving. The ground will remember you, not because you are special, but because that is what ground does for people who treat it like a partner. Somewhere behind you, a bell on a worker's desk will ring, and a man named August will nod to no one and say out loud into an empty shed, "She arrived." Then he will sweep the floor in slow, exact strokes as if he were writing the names in dust and erasing them on purpose so the day could begin again and mean it.